Officials across the country are preparing to facilitate the return of all students to the classroom by the next school year. But for some, online learning might be here to stay by choice. Research by the RAND Corporation found 58 of the 288 district administrators polled, or about 20%, say they will continue online schools or create new ones after the pandemic. Parent and student demand is among the primary reasons for doing so. These standalone virtual schools are popping up everywhere in the U.S., with some notable experiments in Minnesota, Anchorage, Alaska, and Fulton County, Georgia. Unlike the hybrid learning students experienced during the pandemic, these schools would have their own teachers, work only with remote students, and have curriculums designed for online learning. Now, that is in the face of opposition from many government leaders. Heather Schwartz was part of the research team on that study. She is a senior policy researcher and the director of the Pre-K to 12 Educational Systems program at the RAND Corporation. And she joins me now from New Orleans. Heather, welcome. Great to have you with us. So this is fascinating work that you're doing. What more can you tell us about what you found through your research into remote learning? Because I think one thing we can all agree on is the jury is still out in terms of how, what the long-term effects of remote learning on students are. But it certainly seems that there are at least some short-term conclusions people are coming to. Is that right?
Yeah, we had asked a question in October 2020 to school district leaders, superintendents, and leaders of charter management organizations. And one of the questions we asked was an open-ended one about what innovative practices have you started in COVID-19 that you intend to keep? And we were interested, and I personally was surprised to see that virtual schools was the top reason, that was the top answer that they provided. And as you said, 20% said that they plan to, or were considering, adopting virtual schools for good. We've also seen in separate surveys. Go ahead.
No. Finish.
Well, just that we've seen in separate surveys that about, I think it's as many as 30% of parents say that they're potentially interested in remote schooling indefinitely. So it seems like in some way, shape, or form, remote learning is indeed here to stay.
So this is so interesting because the narrative that we've been hearing is that parents are just sort of can't wait to get their kids back in school. For the most part, they don't like online learning, that they feel like their children have had a lost year, et cetera, et cetera. So can you tell us some of the reasons that some of these parents and I guess students have decided they prefer remote learning?
Yeah, I think that it's important to point out that it's probably a minority of parents, teachers, and students who prefer remote learning to be a permanent option. So I don't think that this spells out a future where all of our schools are going to turn virtual by any means. But among the minority that have liked and preferred virtual learning and want to stick with it, the reasons that I personally have heard are students who feel bullied, students who feel like they've been discriminated against in the school setting, some students with special learning needs who do better without the distractions of being among their peers in classes. But there's just certain types of students who feel like they like the flexibility of remote learning. And so, like I said, I think this is really going to work for a minority, not necessarily a majority of students post-pandemic.
And since you say this is more for the minority post-pandemic, why do public school districts, so many of them, seem to want to preserve this option to run an online-only school alongside their regular sort of live curriculum? Do they fear losing students or funding?
Yeah, enrollments are the way that school districts are funded. And also school districts, of course, want to meet the needs or preferences of the parents and teachers and students that they serve. So I think it's a combination of funding and a desire to meet demand.
And just to point out for our viewers, online schools have been in existence, for a while before the pandemic through charter and private programs that I guess in many cases catered to kids with difficult schedules. Maybe they were, pre-Olympic athletes, or maybe they were actors in Broadway shows, whatever it may be. They sort of catered to a lot of different types of students. So can those examples point to how public school-run online programs would work in practice, or would they veer quite significantly from those?
No, I think they can serve as forerunners, but they also offer some red flags. The student performance in virtual schools across a variety of different types of virtual schools has chronically been lower than students' performance in traditional public schools that are comparable students. So there's reasons to have concern about fully online schooling. I think it's really important that we invest in the quality of curriculum for online schools. It's going to be so important that the content that these students who receive in online settings is just as good as what you would get in face-to-face instruction. And right now, we're not there yet.
Right. And I wonder if there is a little element of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of, does online schooling attract perhaps, I don't want to say a less ambitious student, but maybe the type of student who was already struggling with in-person school in some cases. But we'll put that aside for now. What opposition is there from government leaders about making remote learning an option that public schools may even be allowed to offer?
I think that there's going to be probably some opposition on the part of some teachers or parents if districts are to invest and potentially siphon resources away from in-person schools in order to run virtual schools. However, if there's sufficient demand among parents and students for that one virtual school or potentially two virtual schools in a district, I could imagine that there will be negotiation to make that kind of thing work.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Heather Schwartz, thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting conversation into a side of this pandemic educational situation that we haven't much considered yet. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Take care.